Welcome back, everyone, and thanks for joining us. This is the IPMA and PMI joint venture and YouTube channel. This is PM Untold, listening to stories about how to make your project more successful. And this is the third in our series of steering committees and how they can help you be more successful in your career. I'm joined by Jaap, and I'm Liz Hector. Jaap, let's introduce yourself first.
I'm a PhD candidate at Delft University in the Netherlands, and my thesis will be about project steering committees. So yeah, I'm really diving into that topic.
This is the third in the series, and really it's going to be the deeper dive into how these temporary committees support and help drive success for your project. Now, often these steering committees have different names. Sometimes it's called a steering committee, a steerco, a project board, or just a board. Either way, the question is, how do these steering committees make decisions? In fact, here's the first question for you, Jaap. Does a steering committee really steer?
Yeah, and thus, if they steer, do they really do that by making decisions? If you have a look at the project management methodology Prince2, then it says that the project owner is ultimately accountable. It's called the executive at Prince2. But the other members are also responsible. So do they advise the project owner or do they decide together? That's one question. I will try to answer that later. A second one is there are some nice papers by researchers McGrath and Whitty who claim that most committees, most steering committees, also non-project steering committees, really don't decide, but that the people who are in the committee decide based on the authority they have from the permanent function. So, to give you an example, perhaps I'm the manager of an operations department. I might be able to decide in the steering committee about the target process, for example, because I'm this senior manager and that's why I'm in there. I don't 100% agree with both Prince2 and McGrath and Whitty, because what I see is that often if the members really work together and really champion the projects, they have much more power than they formally have if they work together. And the second one is that often also you get a certain budget, for example, to be able to execute a project and to do the oversight of a project. So there you have at least some extra authority.
So when you talk about that, the word steering and even board and project board suggest decision making, but do they really decide? Your point is maybe, maybe not. It could be role based. Is that right?
Yeah. I think I mainly agree with McGrath and Whitty. You are in a steering committee because you have a certain function in an organization, in the owning or funding organization, and there you have a certain authority. And then you mainly decide because something impacts your authority, which you already have outside of the project. So there they are right. Like I gave the example of, let's say, the director of production, but could also be an IT manager, or there could be a different kind of project where you have people working together, for example, to make a new dike. There you also have authority based on the fact that you are an alderman of a municipality.
Right.
Also, what I see that it's often based on decision making together and not just, oh, I advise the project owner to do this and this, and then he or she looks at everybody and says, okay, I'm going to make this kind of decision. I see that hardly ever taking place like that.
So based on that, you're talking about the sort of realm of power or the sphere of power people have. And within that context of power, what are the options for the decision-making process? I mean, is this about voting?
It could be, but I've never seen it in my research so far. But I'm sure there will be steering committees using the voting process. What I see much more often is consensus. So people have to agree on the option. Sometimes it's even in the contracts behind the project. So I've been at the steering committee and there were 4 major building, industrial engineering organizations, and they had to pay the project together, and then they get the results, the revenues later in the maintenance phase. and they all had to agree on all options, all decisions in the steering committee. That was part of the contract. What I sometimes see is officially it's by the project owner only, so really Prince2-like, but even then the project owner really tries to get a form of consensus. Like I said, I've never seen voting, but I'm sure it happens somewhere. What I really would prefer, based on my research, is to try to get consensus. So that's not, I think this is the best solution, but I can live with this solution based on the impact it has on my personal responsibilities. And that speeds up the decision-making process while keeping the commitment from the people who are really involved in this decision.
Yeah, it would seem that that commitment would be really important, right?
Yeah, commitment, yeah.
That's what you're after while you're saying this consensus. It's really to get this commitment and make sure that everyone has the same story when they leave the Stuurgroepen room.
Yeah, that's part of it, yeah. Because most of the time you have a steering committee because, like we saw before, there are conflicts of interests. So yeah, you might not agree here, but then you talk about something together and you make a decision, and you have to champion that decision outside of the steering committee as a member. And also we know from research on management teams that the consensus, the process to get to consensus in itself might even get to better decisions. There's also a risk that decision making takes longer. That's the negative part, but the positive part is that you get more information processed.
So you make a really good point, Jaap, about how these steering committee members actually have their own sphere of influence and therefore are coming in from their particular point of view. And they might use advisors for that. Now, the question is, when you need to get this consensus you've talked about as being important, how do you do that? How does the process start for decision making?
Yeah, or not even better, consent instead of consensus. Yeah, obviously you shouldn't put something on the agenda as a project manager or as a project owner, which is really potentially impactful, and then people read it on the agenda and they just go there. Doesn't make sense. So there will be preparations, and that could be in written form, but especially if you have complex decisions, really impactful, or with conflicts of interest, what I see that it's useful if the project team prepares it together with somebody to which the steering committee members listen, kind of trusted advisors. It's especially common in public works, where you have like an alderman of a municipality. He or she has to decide on something, but you prepare it with senior public servants. That's one option. Another one is, of course, to have small meetings outside of the steering committee. But you have to be a bit careful with that, because in the end, the steering committee should decide, and not some members outside of this committee. Then the whole committee will become quite useless and also demotivating for the other members. What I also see is that information processing is important. So in the research they say you have surface, share and transform perspectives. So you have to take some time for all those three steps. So surface, share and transform. So if the decision is really impactful and there are a lot of conflicts of interest, or really it has high impact, then it's useful to discuss it together also with some of the steering committee members, preferably part of it in a meeting, so they can talk about it and really transform it. Okay, this means this for me, and if we adjust it a little bit, then we can do this and this, and then it helps me, and then the members could also help each other. I've been at one organization where they say we have 4 o'clock meetings for that. So what they do every now and then for a really impactful decision is say we have a separate meeting for that one. We do it at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, because here in the Netherlands often people eat at 6 o'clock, and they still have the culture that the decision should be prepared in this meeting. So not we take another one, so they want to go home, let's say at 5 o'clock or something like that. And that helps to put the pressure on it, and also to get some dedication to this transforming and surfacing and sharing of the information.
Right, so we've learned that your steering committee is there to make decisions by consensus, but also
better consent.
Consent.
Yeah.
And in doing so, they want to do this in a time-boxed way so that decisions don't just linger or get talked about for weeks while the project needs the answer now. Here's another kind of question related to that kind of time boxing. Let's say the project manager has a problem, but a solution is not yet clear. What should they do? Should they bring it to the steering committee and have that 4 o'clock meeting? Or should they wait longer until a decision starts to come clear from their point of view? What do you think?
Well, that's one of the big dilemmas you have as a project manager. And it also depends on the culture of the organization where your project is. I spoke to some project managers and steering committee members who said this is really not acceptable. The project should always deliver options. If not, don't bring it to us. It's a kind of suicide for your career. There are also steering committees where it is acceptable, not too often of course, because it will make you less powerful then as a project manager. My personal opinion is sometimes you have a risk. You know, this might be going on. This is difficult to do. We have an idea of a solution, but we don't have really a solution. And sometimes I try to bring them in the steering committee. But I know there are organizations where this is really against the culture. But I think it should be possible every now and then. Because otherwise you get that some project managers will keep things for themselves and things might become too big and there is nothing to decide anymore. But it's partly a cultural thing.
So having the project manager really understand the culture is one thing.
Yeah.
But don't you think that the project manager also needs a good relationship with the steerco leader or the product owner, project owner? Because they can actually ask advice and maybe they can come up with options together if there aren't any clear ones, and then they can bring it to the steering committee. Would that be another option that you would suggest?
Yeah, it's definitely also an option, or it shouldn't really have to be the project owner only. But it could be that you have a decision and it really impacts this and this steering committee members and not the others. Then you could, of course, prepare it with some of the people. Right. You could also do some politics around it. And there's quite some research stating the importance between the cooperation of the project owner and the project manager. Yeah, that helps. And there has to be some mutual trust also inside the steering committee, but also with the steering committee members and the project manager.
I think you've made a great point with that one. So based on that, from this point about, do steering committees really steer? Do they really make decisions? Is there consent or consensus? What's your main takeaway for us on that?
Yeah, I think good steering committees, well, all of them should steer.
Okay.
If not, it's not a steering committee, it's more like a sounding board. They do it mainly by making decisions. They should mainly decide via consent, sorry, I make a mistake myself. So consent. So does it impact me heavily? The more it impacts me, the more I have a say in things. If it doesn't impact me, I might have an opinion, but it shouldn't be important in the decision-making process. Still, of course, outside the committee, I should champion the decision. And also, if then the members really work together, especially on those really impactful decisions, then the power of the members combined will be much more than of the individual members. I talked with a steering committee member in one of my interviews, and he said, really, I don't understand. There is an apartment which controls all kinds of big projects, and they say we are out of our boundaries every now and then because we don't have this authority. But we're really inside our authorities. But I understand that. Because when you work together as a country director, as a sales director, as an operations director, there will be no director of projects or something like that who will be able to go against your combined decisions. And that can really make the project strong and also the governance of the project strong.
Thank you. That's a really great place to leave it, because what it begs the question is, if that's how they're working in concert or community, how are they handling the individual roles of these individuals, the roles and responsibilities of each of these individuals? And I think that's what we're going to talk about next in our series, 4 of this series, and we hope to see you next time. If you want to know more about steering committees, you can see the full series if you just subscribe to the channel you're on right now. And we'll see you next time on PMI and IPMA podcast.